I did want to send this out to you earlier this week. Between much teaching, recordings, podcasts, and obviously the normal Pesach stuff, it didn't happen. But it's very important that I send it out today, first and foremost, because I owe all of you an ode of gratitude. And to me, Pesach is a festival of gratitude, and I'll explain why in a minute. Thank you all for listening to me every week, for watching me, for encouraging me, for giving me feedback, and for being in dialogue with me about my Torah, about my ideas. I don't take it for granted, and I'm very, very appreciative for this incredible community that's been created. So thank you. I want to talk for a second about this tonight. It's Lela Sedel, the Festival of Liberty, the Festival of Freedom, how we can be in that place of freedom when we know that we still have 59 of our brothers and sisters who are sitting in dungeons in Gaza. How can we celebrate freedom when there is such a sense of despair amongst so many of us? But I think in many ways that is what freedom is. Freedom is the capacity to find an arena, however small that arena is in our lives, and choose how to frame it. We know that so many of the hostages managed to do that while they were in captivity. They found a small arena in which they were able to assert a sense of freedom, whether that's being walking back and forth in a 2 meter square room, whether that's being deciding to keep Shabbat and count the days until it comes, or keep Pesach, whatever it is, whether it is that they recited certain Tehillim that they remembered from their youth. Finding that small arena of freedom, that's a mindset that requires a certain way, a certain posture towards the world, a certain way of framing our reality, a certain story that we tell, and a certain narrative that we adopt. And I think that the rabbis understood this deeply, which is why the entire Haggadah, the entire story, the entire celebration of liberty and freedom is focused on how we tell a story. And the rabbis ask us, and they tell us, that we begin matchil b'gnut u'mesayem b'shevach. We begin with disgrace or condemnation. We end with praise, which is a strange turn of phrase, because really it should say we begin with disgrace and condemnation, and we end with probably more like pride, hope, dignity. Why with praise? And I think the rabbis here, many, many centuries ago, understood a psychological truth that only today modern research has led us to understand, and that is gratitude, the posture of gratitude, the having gratitude in our lives is a way of opening ourselves up. It's the key to achieving a certain sense of balance, a certain sense of joy, deep joy, and meaning in our lives. Joe Dispenza, who's one of these researchers, someone who has been very a pioneer in healing, has spoken about the idea of gratitude kind of being one of the most powerful emotions that actually teaches our body emotionally that an event that we are grateful for has already happened. It kind of already pushes us to the emotion of gratitude before the event has actually happened. So our body, which is like our unconscious mind, will begin to believe that the future event that we want to happen, that we're grateful for, has already happened, which reminds me so much of this idea that the women took with them out of Egypt, the tambourines. Even though the event of redemption hadn't happened, they were already in that space, in that place, in that posture of gratitude, and they knew and they believed that it was going to come. So if I think very carefully about why the rabbis choose that turn of phase, because they knew centuries ago that in order to move the people out of Mitzrayim, and not just in a geographical sense, not in just a literal sense, but in a metaphorical, psychological sense, to move us out of the narrow straits to a wide space, to a place where we are able to be really free in a real sense of the word, they understood that we have to do that through praising God. Because when we praise, we become grateful. Praise, when we say something about someone, or we praise something in our lives, or we continually tell ourselves, I'm grateful for this and I'm grateful for that, it shifts our perspectives. It moves us out of the narrowness, the parochial kind of, turning inwards that happens when we suffer. And when we suffer, it's very, very difficult. When we suffer, there's a sense of being the victim of our circumstances. And gratitude allows us to put ourselves in a much wider arc, to put our situation, even our historical reality, in the wider arc of Jewish history. So we begin by telling the story how Jacob worked for Lavan and we went down to Egypt, but we end Magid with Hallel. And there in Hallel we say, Min ha-meitzar karati anani bermerchavia. We call out, we say, from the narrow straits, we called out to you, God. And God replied, or we just called out, we screamed, we cried. Like that's what we do when we suffer. We're crying, we're screaming, we don't know, we're begging someone to help us. And then God replies, but he doesn't reply from the narrow straits. B'merchavia, he replies from the wide spaces. How do we get to hear God's call? We need to move to the wide spaces. And how do we move to those wide spaces? Well, the Haggadah tells us how. It tells us about the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. It tells us about the story of the women who saved the people, the Jewish nation. It tells us that, as Rabbi Akiva says, in the merit of the righteous women, we were redeemed from Israel. It also tells us a story about Rabbi Akiva himself. The women, Rabbi Akiva, both of them have an incredible character trait, and that is their ability to see beyond the given, to reframe their reality, to see it, to bring it, to sing it into a different place. They come with a posture of gratitude, both of them. Rabbi Akiva, we know the many, many stories of Rabbi Akiva who, while they're standing at the destruction of the temple and the rabbis are crying, Rabbi Akiva's laughing and they're saying, why are you laughing? He says, you're looking at the past, I'm looking at the future. You're looking at the prophecy that was, yes, the destruction has happened. I'm looking at prophecy that's going to be now because we know that the destruction has happened. Rabbi Akiva, who sees water dripping on a rock, just a normal, natural phenomenon. He sees beyond it and says, this is telling me something. Only when we frame our reality in a certain way do we understand reality in a different way. The women, the verb that comes up again and again and again in chapter 1 and 2, the adjective that comes up in chapter 1 and 2 is v'teren. They see again and again and again. The women see reality differently. The midwives, are Yirei Elokim. What does it mean to be a God-fearer? It doesn't mean to fear God. It means to be in awe. Awe is a certain posture to the world, towards the world. It's a way of seeing the world in a certain way. It's being awed and then being grateful for the world that is. This is the women. They know that there's something more. They know that there is a substratum that they don't necessarily understand, that there is a metaphysical reality that is beyond the here and now. And what we know about the rabbis is that when they tell us to tell the story, they bring the sentence Ami Oved Avi. Ami Oved Avi comes from Sefer Dvarim, Parshat Kitavo, when Moshe tells the people, you're going to go into the land. And he doesn't talk about freedom and setting up governments. He says, you're going to go into the land, you're going to go and you're going to farm and you're going to have your fruits. And when that happens, you don't just take those fruits back into your house and live your small, narrow, parochial existence. You take those fruits up to the temple, you bring them to the Beit HaMikdash, you take them to the Kohen Gadol, and there you stand and you tell your story. And that story begins with Ami Oved Avi. My father was a wandering Armenian. Why do we do that? Because it's so easy to simply live in a world in which we think that everything depends on us, that everything is about us, that we work for these fruits and we deserve them, and it's our right to take them back into our house and share them only with our family. And the Torah tells us no. A society that works in that way is a society that will eventually degenerate. A true, sustainable, working, moral society is one in which we move from the narrow straits to the wide spaces, that we understand that even when we planted these fruits, they actually are part of a much bigger story. They are part of the story of our people who came out of Egypt and were brought into this land. They are part of the story and they are part of the arc of Jewish history. And then we take them up, we bring the fruits and we make the proclamation and we say, and now I am the farmer bringing my fruits, but I'm part of this big history, this big story. And we take the fruits and we share it with those in society who don't have as much as we do. That is v'samachta b'chagecha, and that is where we have the joy. Joy, happiness, it comes through gratitude. It comes through telling our story and recognizing that we are part of something bigger. And it comes from moving from the narrow straits to the wider spaces and hearing the call and the response and the voice of God in those wide spaces. My prayer to all of us is that we too in the guise, in the mode of Rabbi Akiva, the women of the Exodus, we too are able to move from the narrow straits to the wide spaces, to hear God's voice, even in this really difficult, tumultuous period in our history, to understand that we are part of an arc of history, of Jewish history, that is really in so many ways a meta history above the history of normal nations, and to know and to pray and to understand that God will, and us with God, like the women, we will eventually move out from the Meitzarim, from Mitzrayim, into Eretz Canaan, the promised land, to the promised new reality. We have to envision it. We have to pray for it. We have to celebrate it before it's already come. We have to sing the Shana Abba B'Yerushalayim and really feel it and really believe it, because next year, please God, all our hostages will be free. All of our people will be celebrating a new found liberty and freedom. Wishing you all Chag Kasher B'Sameach, or Chag Sameach Kasher.